Two Kenosha, Wisconsin police officers are on administrative leave this morning, but officials still have not given an explanation for what led them to shoot Jacob Blake multiple times in the back at close range in front of his three young children. Blake's father tells CNN that his son has undergone multiple surgeries as of this morning. He is expected to survive. Overnight, buildings were set on fire in Kenosha because of the anger from protesters over this shooting. Joining us now is Michael Bell. His son, Michael Jr., was shot and killed by Kenosha police in 2004. Mr. Bell, thanks for being there. I know the weather is not cooperating. We really appreciate you talking about this. And you know, it's interesting looking at both of these cases. Your son was 21 years old. He's a white young man. Jacob Blake is 29 years old. He's black, but you see parallels. So describe those to us.
There's a lot of parallels. Essentially, Jacob's family watched his shooting, and my own son was killed in front of his mother and sister. There are some distinctions, though. Back in 2004, when my son was killed, the police department, the co-workers of the officers involved, found the officers justified. Within just 2 days. They investigated themselves, and we passed a law that changed departments investigating themselves. Today, Jacob Blake's family has the luxury of having an outside agency do that. And so, welcome to ground zero for horrific police shootings here in Kenosha. This is exactly what we've lived through for 16 years.
Gosh, we're so sorry for your loss. And has anything changed in those 16 years? Has the action that you took after your son's death? I mean, as I understand it, that was a so-called routine traffic stop that then escalated. And so was there new training? Had anything changed in the Kenosha Police Department since then?
You know, I think the biggest change has probably become in attitudes. I think the police officers aren't as headstrong as they used to be. I think there's been some change that way, and that's the good thing. Once again, in 2014, a group of us spearheaded a movement, and Wisconsin became the first state in the United States to ensure that police officers don't investigate themselves after a shooting. And this week, I know that we've been working on another legislation, and we're going to be taking a look at police-involved deaths, and we're going to have a review board, kind of like the NTSB, take a look at all the root cause analysis and try to determine what was the real factors involved and how can we make sure that this doesn't happen again. About 30% of all police deaths are labeled as mistake of fact or use of force errors. In my own son's death, the police officer hooked his gun on a car mirror and mistaken it as my son grabbing his weapon, and another officer placed his gun directly to my son's temple and killed him right in front of his mother and sister. So we can go back to those types of cases and we can figure out what went wrong. Was it a human condition? Was it communications? And we can try to say, what can we do to prevent these types of deaths from happening? And this legislation that's going to be introduced this week will be in a first in its nation type.
It's so shocking. I mean, really, the details of your son's death are so gut-wrenching. And I know that you say that the police decided that they were not at fault, but then you hired your own private investigator and got more of the real story.
Yes, in 2010, the city of Kenosha settled a record civil rights settlement with our family, and we refused to accept a non-disclosure or confidentiality agreement, and that's why we're able to go ahead and bring this information forward. And so my son's death has been one of the poster child deaths of police shootings throughout the nation.
And so when something like this happens, when you hear the story of Jacob Blake being shot multiple times in the back in front of his children, when you've heard, I mean, this has obviously been a violent time with police involved shootings over these past months. What happens in your family?
Well, one of the things that I have to tell you is that I saw the video for the first time and my eyes went right to the woman that was just standing outside the door. She was obviously a family member of Jacob Blake's, and she was jumping up and down, and I immediately knew the horror that she was experiencing because her own family experienced that type of thing. You have to understand that this is more than just racism. This is raw police brutality. Now, I know the shooting looks really bad on camera, but I want to give a moment here to allow the investigation to proceed forward because we really don't know all the facts. And so instead of me rushing to judgment and saying it was wrong, we are still waiting for those findings.
That is very judicious of you. I mean, really, after everything that your family went through, it is just so reasonable and judicious and, of course, right that we all do need to take a breath and wait for the investigation. And let's hope that it happens with alacrity, unlike some of the cases that we've seen this summer. I'm sorry, Mr. Bell, we're out of time. But do you have final thoughts in these last few seconds?
Final thought is don't let the local DA review the case. Have an outside prosecutor take a look at it, like in New York or New Jersey. That would be very important here. So thank you, Allison. I appreciate you having me on.
Mr. Bell, we appreciate you. Thanks so much for being here, and we'll talk to you again. Meanwhile,